Hello and welcome to The Drum. I'm Dan Borsha. Tonight we're coming to you from Nipaluna, Hobart in Lutruwita, Tasmania, the lands of the Palawa people. And to welcoming us to country, here's Auntie Brenda Hodge.
Ya Pulingana Miladina Mana Mapalitu. Palawa Miladina Kani Lutruwita. Hello, welcome to all of you here on our land. I am a proud Trawulway woman, descended from Manalagena from Tipukuna in northeastern Tasmania. I respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land on which we gather today, the Muhanina people, who belong to the oldest continuing culture in the world and who roamed this land for more than 60,000 years. With pride and on behalf of our ancestors, I welcome each of you to Aboriginal land, Nipaluna, Hobart, Lutruwita, Tasmania. Nairi Ninatu Mapali. Thank you, everyone.
Well, and thank you, Auntie, for that generous welcome to your country. And joining me on the panel tonight, Communications Coordinator of the NAM, Law Students on Voice and Committee Member for the Global Institute for Women's Leadership, Maggie Blanden. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Good to have you along. Mornings presenter at the ABC Radio Tasmania, Leon Compton. Great to see you here again.
Hi, Dan. How are you?
Well, thank you. In the Lord Mayor of Hobart, Anna Reynolds. Welcome back.
Hi, Dan.
And Chairman of the Aboriginal Land Council of Tasmania, Michael Mansell. Great to have you along.
Yapalingana Narimapali, Dan. Welcome.
Thank you so much, and thank you as well for welcoming us to your land here. And you can join us online using the hashtag The Drum, and we live stream on Facebook as well. First tonight, even by Tasmanian standards, the last week in local politics has been dramatic. It began with a threat of an early election. It ends with the Liberal Premier Jeremy Rockcliffe still holding power, but with serious questions over whether his government can go the distance. The former Attorney-General, Elise Archer, quit Parliament on Wednesday, taking scathing parting shots at a Premier she called, quote, aggressive and threatening. Ms Archer was sacked from Cabinet over bullying allegations, then threatened to blow up the government by sitting as an independent and tipping the Liberals into minority. An ultimatum from the Premier finally pushed Ms Archer out, meaning the government can fill her seat and retain its slim majority, but leaving it more precarious than ever with an election not due until 2025. And I want to bring in the panel. Leon, this time last week, as I was planning to travel here, I was wondering if in fact there might be an election, if we might be in an election campaign right now. Can you step me through just what has happened?
It's been incredibly complex, Dan, but before we talk about perhaps the last 7 days, let's go back to last Tuesday in Tasmania, because that was a moment where an incredibly significant report was handed down, a commission of inquiry, so a state event like a royal commission, and it had been looking into allegations of child sexual abuse in Tasmania over decades, and how the Launceston General Hospital had not responded, and how a pedophile nurse had effectively operated there with protection for a decade or more. It talked about how at Ashley Youth Detention Centre there are major problems and suggestions that those perpetrating violence against children had been allowed to operate for a long time, with concerns that's still going on today. It looked at the education system in Tasmania. Its breadth was wide, and then after 2 years it was tabled in Tasmania's Parliament. Now, we've been through those scenes before, victim survivors in the audience hoping that their courage in giving evidence was going to make a difference, hoping that the massive suite of reforms recommended in this, 191 of them, would be adopted and would lead to change. What happened in Tasmania last week was that 36 hours later, the government was talking about itself. The leaked texts, the suggestion, quote, that I'm sick of victim survivors, alleged to have come from Elise Archer, just threw the government into turmoil. So the Premier, as you mentioned, asked for Elise Archer's resignation from Cabinet. What he is expecting is she'd leave Parliament too. She thought, aggrieved, hang on, I might stick around and I won't offer this minority government confidence or supply, which would have meant an early election. And so we saw a couple of days ago, as you were getting ready to come down, the Premier delivering an ultimatum: either quit Parliament or give me confidence and supply by 9 a.m. Monday, or the state will go to an election and it'll be on your head.
Just an extraordinary couple of weeks. Maggie, as we've just heard Leon kind of outline, this all happened in the wake of that really damning and confronting report, 191 recommendations, what was your observation about the politics and the people here?
Yeah, of course. Well, I myself, I'm a victim survivor, and to see that aired across Australia and Tasmania the last week has been absolutely disgusting, to be witnessing our government speaking about victim survivors in that way. But then thinking about where we're going with the government, I think that it's important to think about the new government coming in, and
As in whoever is the new Attorney
exactly,
General.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that a new commitment is coming forward for treaty in Lutruwita, Tasmania, and that this is an opportunity to really, in the wake of the voice vote next week, that we can come together and the government can really commit to treaty. And I think that would be a really great next step.
And we'll certainly get into that in a moment.
Course,
you touched on there as a victim survivor.
Yeah.
I wonder, were you happy with the action that the Premier took in very quickly calling out that behaviour when that text message emerged?
Yeah, absolutely. Seeing the flow-on effect of those texts being leaked was really devastating, especially for victim survivors online. And so, yeah, as myself, that was really distressing to think, wow, the people you're meant to trust in government don't respect or care about the needs of victim survivors. So I'm really glad that he did call that behaviour out.
Yeah, that must have been incredibly tough to grapple with. Michael, how have you looked at the politics and the politics and the people of this last couple of weeks?
Well, I mean, they're a strange government, the Tasmanian government. We've had successive premiers who are very progressive. Peter Gutwin called for a treaty with Aboriginal people, and Jeremy Rockcliffe has got such a good attitude to Aboriginal people, but they don't produce the goods. We haven't had any land returned to us for 18 years, and they've been in power for 9 years. Leon mentioned Ashley. This particular government used to fund the Aboriginal community, and we took 50 of our kids out of Ashley into community projects so we could reattach them to their families and get them back into the community. This government cut the funding to it. No explanation. And so the Aboriginal community is never quite sure whether you've got the government on side in word only, because when it comes down to doing the actual goods, we lose them. They just can't produce anything.
Anna, I want to bring you in because of course, we've been hearing really powerful comments about that report, that inquiry. What sort of impact has this political saga had on that? Because it seems that there is not a lot of talking now about the report and perhaps where to next.
Yeah, I think from the perspective of the capital city and for local government more generally, I think it's been about a year of uncertainty and disruption and conflict, and it's actually really sad for Tasmania and a bit embarrassing for Tasmania that our government is constantly changing. A lot of the conflict is internal to the Liberal Party. That's where the change has really happened. But on the ground, it really, what we're seeing, different ministries, different ministerial shuffles every couple of months. You can't keep track of which minister is which. And now we're left with a situation with a ministry that I would say is not particularly experienced, and it's certainly not diverse. I mean, this would have to now be one of the least diverse ministries in the country.
That's in terms of agenda specifically, isn't it?
Right.
There's one female government. There's Madeleine Ogilvie in the lower house.
Yes, and Joe Palmer.
In the upper house. So in terms of the lower house in Tasmania, one female Liberal member, and so many big projects on Dan. So you've got this massive commission of inquiry to respond to, enormous recommendations across the public service and all levels. But then you've got the huge projects on, the stadium idea not far from where we're standing, an interconnector running to the mainland, challenges with literacy and numeracy in this state at a school level. There's so much going on, and a government that, even though it escaped this week the prospect of an early election, still is looking very shaky, and it'll be interesting to see what the conversation looks like when Parliament resumes on the 17th of October.
Yeah, and look, just finally, while we're on this discussion, you've got a very different electoral system here. For anyone, like I know you and I, Leon, and maybe everyone on this panel is a bit of political nerds, give us a sense of how it's different and how it works here.
So
what's going to happen next also?
Yeah, well, what's going to happen next? So our parliament's about to expand, by the way, so this is interesting.
35 seats,
yeah,
I believe.
35 seats. One of the challenges this and any government has is you're picking a ministry from, you know, whatever percentage of the 25-seat lower house you hold, and of course the 15 in the upper house. So it's challenging to get the numbers to perform ministries and all the responsibilities that come with them. We've got the Hare-Clark system. It means in our 5 federal electorates around Tasmania, so federal lines, we elect 5 members of parliament to the lower house from each of those 5. And the nature of the Hare-Clark system, and I know the Lord Mayor has a slightly different view about its merits than I do, but one of the effects that it creates is that when you're campaigning, you're really campaigning against the other people. You know, if Maggie and I are in the same party, I'm trying to get more votes than her rather than defeat my, you know, Labor or Liberal or Greens opponent, which is the sort of the system that most Australians are used to.
Your friend is your enemy rather than your enemy is your enemy.
What I'm trying to do is get ahead of my party mate rather than perhaps defeat the person who might hold radically different views to me. And so we will argue about whether or not that creates a good environment for people to put their hands up and run. But what's interesting is it's going to 7 seats. And so neither political party, I think, electorally is making a great case for coming and joining the tribe and putting your hand up. The expectation is that independents, almost hitherto unknown in Tasmania as a force on the lower house floor, there's going to be lots of independents or maybe members of the Jackie Lambie network next time around, or people from different voices of style candidates that lots of our audience know from around Australia are going to step up and maybe make this a very different government whenever the next election is held.
Yeah, I think one of the things to point out is that the Hare-Clark system was one of the world's first proportional representative systems.
From here.
Absolutely. And the rest of the world said what a great democratic electoral system that is. And so proportional representative systems are actually the norm in most parts of the world and are seen to be more democratic because your vote will have more power even if your one particular candidate doesn't get... There isn't just the one prize. So in the seats you have a range of representatives you can go to depending on your perspectives and views on different issues. So it is a very democratic system. It's very common around the world, including places like New Zealand. It's what the Senate is based on as well. So I think the reality is that sort of two-party system is becoming less and less common, even in our lower house now. So I think we just all have to get better at doing that sort of multi-party, multi-interest politics and looking at the skill that is in the parliament, because it might not be one of your party members, but someone might be an ideal member to be a member of your ministry.
Oh, I could talk to you all day about the political system, but we have got a lot of ground to cover this evening. In terms of the political instability, it couldn't have come at a worse time for Tasmania, with the economic outlook looking rather grim for the year ahead. The latest Deloitte Access Economics Business Outlook report has found that Tasmania is the only state predicted to go backwards in the 2023-24 period, with the economy expected to contract by 0.3%, risking recession. This comes as perhaps one of the state's biggest tourism drawcards. The Dark Mofo Festival has been cancelled next year. The Drum's Claudia Strawn reports.
Dark Mofo has earned its place as Australia's most edgy festival. But after a decade of pushing the artistic limits, it's pressing the pause button in 2024. Since Dark Mofo's inception back in 2013, the festival has felt the weight of shifting conditions and the burden of escalating costs. Now it is time to reevaluate and renew so that Dark Mofo can sustain another decade. The news has come as a blow for many in the hospitality sector.
The impact Dark Mofo has is huge. It's bigger than Christmas and New Year for us in Salamanca. It really is a thing. It's a bookmark in the middle of winter. It gets us through this whole period in Tasmania that can often be a little sleepy.
In 2022, Dark Mofo injected more than $30 million into the local economy. And this year, it attracted 45,000 interstate travellers. Local writers like Adam Ouston see the cancellation as another hit to the performance industry after years of disruption from COVID.
There's still a kind of a lack of venues for emerging artists to perform, whereas before COVID that wasn't so much the case. There were places for fledgling bands and that kind of thing.
To ease some of these concerns, the Tasmanian government has announced a new funding package of $1.8 million over the next 3 years to help promote tourism over the off-season. Two of the festival's biggest events, the Winter Feast and the Nude Solstice Swim, will still go ahead in 2024. The industry says the cancellation is disappointing, but it's important that the festival remains a trademark event for the state into the future.
The most important thing for us is that Dark Mofo remains a staple of winter for decades to come. And so if that means that that the organisers have to take a year off, consolidate, look at how they can deliver it sustainably into the future, then we support that.
And others are hoping that a decade of Dark Mofo has created an interest in Tasmanian artists that will continue beyond this year's hiatus.
It's an opportunity for people to do things that aren't associated with the festival and to create their own events and do their own things, which could be exciting and just as innovative.
Michael, I want to start with you on this. Do you think that this decision around MOFO is going to have an impact? Because we know that when we have big discussions about major cultural events, there are flow-on effects, aren't there?
Well, it is a major cultural event. Hobart comes to life when the Dark Mofo's operating, and the Aboriginal community gets involved in it too. But it's an opportunity to, over 12 months, for us to look at alternatives. And one of the things, like Leon's already mentioned about the football stadium, $750 million, and the price still climbing. If we had an Aboriginal cultural centre in Hobart, all the ships that come in would be dying to buy all the necklaces and all of the Aboriginal artefacts that are made now, just as the tribal people made them over thousands of years. Where are we going to house them? We could show people around the rock carvings up in the northwest coast and explain to them what all the markings mean. But the government just says to us, well, we're not going to help you. We're more interested in the big campaigns like the stadium or some other thing. And so the Aboriginal community is really left out of the action.
Anna, is there an opportunity here, while dealing with the fallout as there has been of the cancellation of the festival, to be looking, as Michael's saying, at perhaps a different arrangement or different range of ways to explore culture with having that impact of bringing people here, which has been one of the big draw cards of Dark Mofo?
Yeah, look, I think the appeal of winter tourism will continue, and I do expect that Dark Mofo will come back in a new and a bigger and better way. We now have, apart from Dark Mofo, we also have Festival of the Voices and our wonderful science-based festival, Beaker Street, all in the winter period. So we know that people are looking for something a little bit different coming to Tassie in the middle of winter with the darkness and the cold and get to rug up. So I think there's definitely an opportunity, but you do have to invest in it, and it's not necessarily investing in massive infrastructure that's going to take years and hardly used. It's about investing in people and in good ideas and in that arts and cultural space, which we know it's very competitive. So many cities are investing in festivals, in great arts and culture, and we have to do that as well because we know that people travel for that. Also, the other interesting recent news was saying that our national parks are seeing very high visitation as well. And again, people are travelling to Tassie to go walking, to experience the nature. So it's another area that we are needing to inject more funding into. And again, Aboriginal Ranger programs, we don't have as many of them as we potentially could do working with federal government money. So I think there's lots of great ideas. It is just about really focusing on the important part of this cultural tourism.
Dan, what people need to understand about Dark Mofo is it's like Mona itself. It's one of those projects that emanates from the mad mind of David Walsh and it's a privately funded, I know the Lord Mayor and the Council and also the state government chip in a bit, but fundamentally it's this crazy expression of the mind of David Walsh. All of the ideas that might come in its place will need to be driven perhaps by the bureaucracy, by governments or by passionate locals with a lot of support. So it'll look different because, you know, Dark Mofo certainly is quite off the charts when it comes to what appears on a program in any given year. Yeah,
and I understand that Winter Feast, which is not far from where we're sitting right now, will continue to be happening. I read that. Well, I was here when I was filming 1+1 this year, so looking forward to getting back to that. But moving on, and alarmingly, the latest figures from the Reserve Bank show up to 50,000 households paying off a variable rate mortgage will run out of money, their savings, by early next year. We're seeing the results of that stress play out in Tasmania as those from the mainland go in search of more affordable housing options. The state government has an ambitious plan to boost supply by building thousands of new homes this decade and is currently the only capital city currently seeing a significant drop in property prices. The Drum's David Taylor has more.
Arnaud Thomas and his wife are chasing their slice of the great Australian dream in Hobart.
It just ticks all the boxes in terms of what we want as lifestyles. Everywhere you want to buy a house here, you have an option to either have a mountain view or a sea view.
Sick of renting in Brisbane, Arnaud and his family moved to Hobart earlier this year in search of an affordable home.
A 4-bedroom house here will set you back $950,000 on a nice, comfortable block, which I haven't seen that in Brisbane.
While he waits for a bank to approve a home loan, rents in Hobart have jumped by more than 60% since 2016, and that has pushed 40,000 households into rental stress.
It is frustrating, and we are the kind of people we want to go, we don't want to go anywhere with our guns half cocked. We want to get the stamp, here, you pre-approved for this much, go nuts.
While Tasmanians like Arnaud anxiously wait to move from the rental market to their own home, for thousands of others it's a desperate search for somewhere safe to sleep at night. State government figures show 4,500 Tasmanians are on a list waiting for social and affordable housing.
So, for instance, if you have disability or accessibility needs or something like that, it's very hard to get into private rental, or you're discriminated against in some way.
Tasmania, like other states and territories, is facing a housing crisis. A new government authority, Homes Tasmania, has been tasked with building 10,000 new social and affordable homes by 2032. Its inaugural CEO says she wants to show other states and territories how to work with the private sector to build enough homes to meet the demand.
I think there's a way of sharing risk, and there's things that government can do that can make things more certain for government, for construction agencies, particularly when you've got a bit of economic volatility.
The volatility in property prices, at least, is plain to see. Hobart was the strongest property market in Australia from 2015 to 2022. But prices are now falling, with property research firm PropTrack forecasting a 3 to 6% decline in prices by Christmas, potentially knocking up to $40,800 from Hobart's July median dwelling value of $680,000. That's adding to Arnaud's fear of missing out.
We feel it's a really good time to buy, so we're getting quite impatient.
Leon, I want to start with you on this. What do you see as the biggest challenges when it comes to the housing mix in Tasmania right now?
That's such a big question, Dan, because on the one hand you've got this idea that it's the supply side and we need to build, baby, build. But on the other hand, there's these really dramatic forces around the number of houses in short stay accommodation. And I'm not just talking about in the suburbs immediately around where we're sitting right now in Hobart, but we've broadcast the morning's program from, say, Mount Street in Burnie, and you hear these stories of businesses that will employ, a young apprentice to move into the area, to come work as a chef, to move to the area for a job. They'll take the job, but they can't find anywhere to live. The woman that runs the Bicheno IGA, a beautiful beachside town on the east coast of Tasmania, if you can physically enter her building and ask for a job, she'll pretty much give you one as long as you can answer this question: do you have somewhere to live? Yeah. And a part of the complexity of that is that in these beach communities now, more and more places are moving on to short stay accommodation, which is great, but when you need a new teacher at the school or a new nurse at the hospital, or you need someone to come work at the IGA or a new chippy in town, the capacity to find somewhere to live is becoming really difficult. You could talk about negative gearing practices, you could talk about migration flows and the way regional areas are encouraging people to move to places like Tasmania. So it's a really complex issue. There's a lot going on, and it feels like whatever solutions are there are some time away.
Anna, we often see these circumstances around housing having a flow-on effect of people needing more support. Are you seeing that kind of requirement or need here in Hobart?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a really significant issue for us and all capital cities. We've had a little glimmer of good news recently. We've now got the highest vacancy rate of all the capital cities. So just in the last 6 months, there's more vacancies, and that has had an immediate impact on rentals, which have dropped ever so slightly. But that's on the back of, 5% increases every year for the last 7 years in terms of rental prices. So huge rent increases over the last decade in Hobart compared to what it used to be. And this is in a city, in a state that has lower than average incomes. So our incomes in Tasmania are lower than the mainland, and that means that higher rental prices and increases have a big impact. So we do need to tackle things from a range of angles. Leon's right, short stay is a big issue for us in Hobart. People love to come here for the weekend, they love to feel like they're living like a local, but it means that about 9% of our rental stock is in short stay, and that's one of the highest percentages in the country. So we've taken some action at the local level by increasing rates, doubling rates for short stay properties, but it's a very attractive proposition for landlords to put their homes into short stay. They earn so much money in the summer and over weekends that it really is very profitable. So we all have to tackle this together, state, local, federal. There's also the issue of vacant land and vacant properties, which I know the Victorian government has really recently looked at, and that I think is really sensible. Yes, let's build, but also let's use our existing stock efficiently, make sure it's not just sitting vacant, find incentives for people to keep their properties on the long-term rental market, providing homes, not mini hotels.
Yeah, there's the kind of layering there of issues. And Michael, as you're listening to that and thinking about the broader circumstance around housing, what about for Aboriginal people here? Are there additional
it's not
challenges?
Just Aboriginal people, Dan. Like up on the Cunnamalooka Tamar River in Launceston, you'll see at least 7 or 8 tents of white people and Aboriginal people who camp because they cannot get a housing department home. And there's been a lot of publicity down here in Hobart where people camped out at the Derwent Park because, again, the same problem, there's not enough houses. No one can tell me that there's not enough money around to provide houses for the homeless if they stop buying these nuclear AUKUS submarines and stop putting all this money into Australia's military to be the local sheriff for the Americans in the Pacific and part of the anti-China war, everybody would be housed. So it's a matter of priority, and instead of the federal government portraying Australia as we're a powerful organisation, we've got to take it up to the Chinese, let them start looking at the domestic situation and start housing people who desperately need government help.
The government would say you can do 2 things at once. I'm sure they would say you can do military expansion and housing. Are they doing that enough?
Well, why are they? Why aren't they? I mean, the government's got a reasonable argument to say, well, you can't put the whole of the budget into any one sector. That's fine. But the government have been talking about the voice to Parliament, housing Aboriginal people. Well, why aren't they housing Aboriginal people now? Why are they waiting? And with the money the amount of money that's going into these military objects, only a portion of that if it was used around Australia, would house all the homeless people, whether they're black or white.
Maggie, I want to bring you in because we know that housing challenges quite often are faced by younger people. What's your observation of what's happening in the housing sector?
Yeah, of course. So I'm a rental person myself as well. I'm renting a place. I currently study in Melbourne, so I'm living over there in Naarm. However, I have grown up in Tasmania and I've seen that housing definitely disproportionately affects Aboriginal people. That's obviously echoing Michael's point. It affects everyone, but it does affect Aboriginal people. Aboriginal people are coming out of jail, you know, we're the most incarcerated people on this planet, and then we're coming out and we're having nowhere to live, nowhere to go. Yeah, there might be a housing shelter available, but it's not long term. We need needs-based, sustainable funding for Aboriginal people and housing. It's something that's really missing.
Well, that leads us perfectly to the discussion on the voice to Parliament now, where we know that Tasmania is considered one of the key battleground states in next week's voice referendum. And this is despite it being the country's least populous state. It's a must-win in order to meet the twin requirements of a majority of voters in a majority of states. This week, the Prime Minister's been on the ground here in Hobart trying to rally support.
But the truth is there is no downside in voting yes. Voting yes will just give 3% of the population the opportunity to be heard. An opportunity to be heard because we know that when people are directly affected and they're able to have a voice and be listened to, you'll get better outcomes.
And this follows no campaigner, Senator Jacinta Nampajimpa's price to the state just a few weeks ago.
It is evident to me that this elite proposal is about division in our country. And it is that old rule of divide and conquer that I can't stand for. I'm not going to allow a line to run straight through the middle of my family within our Constitution.
Leon, I want to start with you. Tasmania and South Australia have been central to both campaigns. Right here, what sort of impact has that had on the way that the public discussion is carried out?
It's funny because, and we saw this through the same-sex marriage campaign, I think Tasmanians particularly, and others will agree or disagree, I think Tasmanians particularly respond down to local campaigns. I'm not sure we're as interested in getting involved in whatever is being, you know, the way the commentary flows on the mainland. And I think Tasmania has a capacity to surprise. So we can take you back to 2017 just for a moment. Tasmania, only 20 years before that, had not decriminalised homosexuality. We were the laggard of all states and territories in that regard. And yet somehow 20 years later, Tasmania had evolved to a point where after Victoria, we returned the second highest vote in favour of same-sex marriage in the country. I'm wondering, given Tasmania's horrific history, attempted genocide of First Peoples here, whether there might be something happening within Tasmanians who want to see a change, who might feel like it's possible through the voice and might surprise the rest of the country in the way that the state votes in terms of the yes or no argument in favour of yes.
I would say that there definitely was a genocide in this state.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And because, of course, we know that that's been reported on, in fact, by many historians right here.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've also heard politicians saying that colonisation didn't have a negative impact. I wonder, along that line, what you thought of that.
Well, that's an absolute joke. Like, you can look at the panel today, Michael and I up here, proud Palawa people. We know that colonisation has impacted us. It has been a true thing that has impacted us disproportionately and has... we have intergenerational trauma. We have, the biggest population of peoples across the world that are incarcerated. We have children removed from families more than white children. You know, that's just a joke to be saying that and to be corrupting the minds of Australian people.
And that has been a big part of the debating and the discussion in recent weeks. What's your sense of of the debate and the campaign around the Voice to Parliament?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am the communications coordinator for the NARN Law Students on Voice, which is an amazing group
Which is a group of, supporting the Voice?
We do neutral, accessible and fact-based information on the referendum. So we're almost a week away from the vote. So we've been giving a half-an-hour presentation across Australia to schools, hospitals, aged care, Rotary clubs, you name it. Just going through a bit of a crash course on constitutional law, what even is the Constitution, and then what is a referendum, and then going to what we'll see on the 14th of October, what will be on the ballot paper, what the chapter being added into the Constitution even looks like. So many Australians haven't even opened up Google and typed in the Chapter 9, proposed Chapter 9. So many people haven't got the information for what they're voting on. So we just go around and we help people understand that. And then we run through what will happen post-October 14th, looking at what the Voice could look like if it did pass. But no, we're not for or against the Voice in the group. But we, of course, we're run by two Indigenous staunch women, myself and Keshi Moore. And so we all have our own personal opinions, but when we've got our shirts on, when we're representing the group, we're neutral and fact-based.
It's about the information.
Yeah.
Michael, what's your sense of how the debate is playing out here in your home?
I don't think Tasmania's any different to the rest of Australia, because I've just come back from the mainland speaking at different venues over there. I think this whole Voice thing was ill-conceived. The method of using the Constitution instead of legislation was never thought through properly. The whole campaign for the yes has been inflexible. The moment they got to April this year and realised there was not going to be bipartisanship, they should have immediately taken stock and gone back to Albanese and said, look, no referendums ever passed without bipartisanship, so we need to be flexible. No, they wanted to crash or crash through. Both sides have exaggerated the position. The Yes campaign are trying to convince the country that the Prime Minister and state premiers and the peak organisations cannot reduce and close the gap. But an advisory body meeting a few times a year in Canberra is going to be able to do it? Oh, come on. And on the other hand, the No campaign are calling this racial division. They are fomenting racial division. They are the ones who are creating it, because if you have a referendum as part of a democratic process, half the country will vote yes and half will vote no, and everybody will say, oh, that's great, that's democracy. If you have a federal election every 4 years, half will vote Liberal, half will vote Labor. Oh, that's great, that's democracy. But because some idea is put up with the word Aboriginal in it, the No campaign are saying it's racial division. It's not. It's normal democracy. But the Yes campaign, they brought this on themselves. It's an ill-conceived idea. Instead of relegating Aboriginal people, if it's about empowerment, to an advisory body, why didn't they go for designated seats in Parliament like the Maori have got? It works over there.
This is something you've long advocated for, and I think it was actually in April you wrote an opinion piece saying that that is exactly what should happen, that it wouldn't need to be through the Constitution, that it can be done as an amendment to the Electoral Act, I believe it was.
That's right.
Why do you think that would work, or that would make a difference, where I think in that article you said that you weren't confident that the Voice would?
Well, decisions are made inside the chamber of the Parliament. So you really want Aboriginal representation in there who can argue the case on our behalf, who can leverage against governments for a deal, and their vote can either block racist laws or promote positive laws. So they're direct sitting at the decision-making table. The Voice idea is to sit outside the Parliament, being able to advise. In other words, saying, oh, please, Mr. White Man, when you continue to make these decisions like you have done for the last 200 years, will you please allow us to advise you instead of putting up? Let's have direct representation in the Parliament. They do it in the United States, state of Maine. They do it in Colombia. They've been doing it in New Zealand for 150 years. Why can't we do it in Australia?
And on that point, there would be some listening to you that would say there are 11 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people across both houses. Does that represent that kind of representation that you're talking about?
Well, there's 10.
10.
Jackie Lambie is not an Aboriginal. She's got no Aboriginal ancestry. But anyway, we've got 10 Aboriginals inside the federal parliament, but they are not put there by the Aboriginal vote. They are put there by the people who vote either Liberal, Labor or the Greens. Aboriginal people are so spread around the different electorates, we don't have the voting power to vote our own people in. So if representative democracy means the parliament should reflect the people it governs on behalf of, you've got to make sure that the Aboriginal vote is given its worth, and we should be able to vote Maggie in or vote Noel Pearson in on our vote, so they are answerable to Aboriginal people, not to the Labor Party, the Greens or the Liberal Party.
Michael, can I just ask you a question though? In your mind, would a successful vote for the Voice, if the Voice gets up, would that not make a pathway towards what you're suggesting more likely?
No. The upshot of the referendum is if the referendum is a yes, there'll be no other discussion up until the next federal election on anything other than implementation of the Voice. Strangely, if the referendum is defeated, topics like Aboriginal representation inside the Parliament, treaty and truth-telling are suddenly back on the table because the Prime Minister...
Because every champion, every person championing for the Voice would be licking their wounds from a campaign that they've just lost.
Yeah, but hang on. The Prime Minister has stated over and over again he will implement the Uluru Statement in full. So if he loses on the Voice, he's got these other components. The Australian public will be probably split 60-40 on the Voice. So there's enough knowledge about advancement of Aboriginal people for the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition to say, OK, we have to do something for Aboriginal people rather than just walk away. After October the 14th, they can't just walk away because people would say, why did you put us to all that trouble if you're just going to walk away and leave the whole topic? They're going to have to follow it through in some form.
And I want to bring you in on this point that Michael was making, that we've heard throughout the year that the government took a crash-through approach. You're in politics, in governance. Do you think it's been the right approach?
Well, the City of Hobart endorsed a motion earlier this year to support Yes, the Yes campaign, and that's along with a whole range of cities around the country. And we did that because we think it's an important first step in recognition of the traditional owners of this country and you know, acknowledging Michael's ambitions, which are very, you know, I agree with them, but I think having that first step, we as a council thought would be a positive first step in that process. Local governments around the country have done lots of things at the local level to help tell the truth of our history, to support Aboriginal people in their campaigns, to change the date, for example, to do more truth-telling and telling the truth of our colonial history. So we have quite an important role in this process. But I think it is really disappointing to see the very negative, and I believe, you know, largely a lot of racist rhetoric coming out through this campaign. It's mean-spirited, it's paranoid. I mean, this should be a source of pride for the Australian community that we are finally taking a positive step away from what is a very dark colonial past and saying, you know, this amazing culture, or these amazing cultures, are our Indigenous people, our First Nations, and we recognise them and we want to hear from them. It doesn't go all of the way I think that some people would like it to, but I think it's a positive first step, and I am worried about what it says about Australia and our recognition of our Indigenous communities if the no vote does succeed.
We do need to realise, though, that this debate is re-traumatising Aboriginal people. The mental health epidemic at the moment for Indigenous people surrounding the voice is absolutely disgusting. We're really wearing the burden of this referendum, you know. We're trying to walk down the street and people are like, oh, I know you, you're Aboriginal. What are you voting on the referendum? You know, my Instagram DMs blowing up 24/7. Leave me alone, I'm trying to do my life. I've got an amazing organisation. Go talk to us through that, you know. We need to get through our life. We're getting things thrown at us at all directions as Aboriginal people. We don't need to be talking about the voice every single second of the day. I know that domestic violence levels in Aboriginal communities are skyrocketing at the moment because of the voice. These tensions are coming home, bringing it home to family. This isn't what we need. We need to be getting on with our lives.
Yeah, that call about the domestic violence rate skyrocketing, where does that come from?
Yeah, we'll be able to show you the article afterwards, but I was on ABC this week, actually. Yeah.
Because, I mean, that's a big call, and we know that there has been an increasing rise in trauma and about the mental health challenges that have
Young
also...
people are struggling. We don't need this. We're already struggling enough.
Yeah. Well, Michael, I want to bring you in on that, on the cost of this to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community.
Well, you can talk about the human cost. We're only just talking about housing. This referendum is going to cost about $400 million. How many houses could you build for the homeless with that? I think the core issue that we have to acknowledge here is it doesn't matter which way the referendum goes. If it wins or if it gets defeated, there will be no practical benefit for Aboriginal people. It doesn't. If a referendum's successful, it does not confer any rights on Aboriginal people and imposes no obligations on governments. So why are we doing it? Why didn't we go through the Parliament and say to the politicians, it's your responsibility to act on behalf of Aboriginal people and provide a real benefit by, if you want a legislative voice, we could have had it now. It could have been up and running.
The architects of the voice would say that it's about creating a space for voices that aren't being heard to be heard, and that the responsibility that you touch on there is really for the government and the bureaucrats of the day to do the listening and to hear that. Is that something? Is that...
Are you going to get anyone more powerful than Noel Pearson, who's in the media every day? He's got the ear of Prime Ministers and state premiers. What do you mean we haven't got a voice? We've got 10 Aboriginals inside the Parliament, one of whom is the Federal Minister for Aboriginal Affairs.
And the Shadow Minister on the other side as well.
And the Shadow Minister. So we've got plenty of voices. We're just not being listened to. And so instead of talking about yet another bureaucratic structure for Aboriginal people, we should be focusing on those politicians who are in there now to try to get them to do something practical for Aboriginal people. I think a lot of Aboriginal people are going to be let down by this whole campaign. If you see those ads, you see that wonderful little boy, Aboriginal boy, oh, you know, will I ever grow up to have a voice?
Yeah, the Yes campaign.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is just tragic for people to use that kid in that form, as it is for the conservative no campaigners, to raise race where it shouldn't be raised at all. This whole thing has been a bloody disaster, and the quicker we get it over and done with, I think Australians, Leon and I talked about this a few days ago, I think once the referendum's finished, because the issue was not about white people in Australia, it was about Aboriginals, most people just move on. So the question is, how can we force the Prime Minister, who you have to remember, a great friend of Aborigines, he's the one when ATSIC was in, who's an advisor to the government. Albanese voted with John Howard to dismantle ATSIC, to get rid of it. When the racist Northern Territory intervention was still in, and Albanese came into power under the Rudd government, Albanese voted to extend it.
Yeah, the Stronger Futures legislation.
Exactly, and the other day, when it came out, why don't you change the divisive January 26 so everybody can find a date to celebrate. No, Albanese said, I will stick with it.
Will you take us to the messaging there when you were talking about some of those advertisements there? And now with less than 8 days from the Voice referendum vote, campaigning is really heating up and it's taking many, many forms, from national press club addresses to social media videos that have gone viral online.
If you don't know, vote no. A slogan offered as an answer to a straightforward, although profoundly important proposal. The Australian spirit evoked by the Don't Know slogan is a poor shadow of the spirit which drew up our Constitution. It invites us to a resentful, uninquiring passivity. Australians, whether they vote yes or no, are better than that.
There is worse information on question in some social media as well about the, world conspiracies of the United Nations will control all land in Australia. All land. You will lose private ownership of everyone's home will go with a yes vote. It's just absurd.
If you don't know, find out what you don't know. What that asinine slogan is saying is if you're a dinosaur, a dickhead, who can't be bothered reading, then vote no.
I've heard that it could divide the nation.
How?
Okay, so I have read something online about just the nature of democracy in general.
Yes, because it's patronising to Indigenous people, and I would hate to patronise an Indigenous person.
Okay, so it doesn't go far enough, but then it also goes too far.
Yes.
Because democracy.
No,
Have you Googled it? The Voice, the proposal, the referendum. Have you Googled it?
You know what? I have not had heaps of time. Just
busy.
Yeah. Pretty much.
Life.
Too busy with life there in that commercial that went online from Briggs. I want to bring you in first, Maggie, on that one. What did you think of that? Because it was really shifting the way this conversation was had.
Yeah, it's everything we stand for at NAM Law Students on Voice. So when I saw that, I sent it to literally everyone who has messaged me in the last couple of months to be like, have you actually Googled what we're voting on next Saturday? Like, come on, guys, this is your responsibility. Stop putting the burden on Aboriginal people to educate you on what's going on. Simple Google, first thing that comes up tells you everything. Decide for yourselves, guys. It's not that hard.
Well, that's really what Briggs was saying, kind of making light of, people not Googling it, Googling other things about some reality show and SCIs and the like.
You're not too busy, guys.
Michael, we also heard there from Ray Martin, who was speaking of dinosaurs and D-heads, saying is this a more effective style of communicating, or does that just lose people?
I think people close their minds once they hear being you're a racist or you're ignorant because you're against the Voice, or if you vote yes, you're causing racial division. I think people are shutting off to that. One of the disappointments of this whole debate has been the failure of either of the camps to talk about the merit of the proposal. You remember David Littleproud of the Nationals came out when he declared we're against it because we can't see how...
Last November.
Yeah, how this can close the gap. What a wonderful opportunity for the Yes camp to come out and say, well, here's how it will make a difference. But instead, what do? Belittled him, talked about racists.
Do you think that was the missed opportunity of having that conversation about closing the gap, about what the tangible differences were that they say it would make?
Yeah, I think one of the difficulties is, if I'd have been in the Yes camp, I would have had difficulty trying to come up with rational arguments how an advisory body could make all the difference. I mean, it's a very big ask to try to convince someone of something like that. But both camps, Dan, have let everybody down by playing the man instead of the ball and personalising their arguments instead of saying, Let's talk about the merit of the proposal.
Anna, we heard that speech at the press club today from the former Chief Justice, French, really saying this is about the future, and it was a very powerful call to yes. I wonder, is now the best time to have heard that, or was it when all the allegations were being made that this would be a constitutional mess? Was the timing off?
Look, I don't envy anyone running a referendum campaign in this day and age. I mean, social media, there is all of that information out now about how videos have been edited and shared that are completely inaccurate.
This is the that you're talking about, the Prime Minister, where he was saying this is not about the United Nations, it's not about this, that and the other, and that bit was cut that said that it was about the United Nations.
Yeah, so it's not easy. Change is not easy. As Michael was saying, change will always have people saying, oh, you're being divisive, but unless we do have these debates, we won't change. So change can be messy. And referendums are very, very difficult. I agree that some of these reforms could have been undertaken by the Parliament rather than going out to referendum. Not everything is able to be solved through referendum, and it's challenging because a lot of people aren't interested in issues and they will sort of go with very populist messages. I guess it is, from my perspective, it is about Australia taking pride in the First Nations of this continent and catching up with the rest of the world. I mean, Indigenous people right around the world do have rights recognised for decades in many, many democracies of the world. And this is quite a small reform. It is, I think, a first step, quite a small reform recognising this the Indigenous people, which do have rights in international law, and we are so far behind places like Canada, the US, Scandinavia, New Zealand, that years and years ago recognised that very basic principle that we came in and took the land, and we didn't do that lawfully in many cases. We didn't enter into a treaty at the time, and now we need to start that journey of catching up.
In fact, the land was called Terra Nullius. No one here. We've got about a minute left. What do you make of the campaigning?
Well, I suppose I wanted to jump forward in time just a moment to the day after the campaign, because I think about the Maggies and the Michaels who have taken positions or have worked so hard, Aboriginal people, whatever side of this argument they've been on, and think about what it will be like if the vote goes your way, not your way, if there's triumphalism at the defeat of something you're passionate about. I think we need to think...
The cost either way as well.
Yeah, the emotional cost, right? People have spoken up and taken a chance. I think as a community, Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal, we just need to think about being very mature and understanding that there are so many people that have made such big commitments about this one way or the other in how we react whichever way the vote goes.
Yeah, I've definitely got therapy booked in for the Monday.
Yeah, which is an important
to.
point, and important points to finish on. Thank you so much to all of our panel. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for. I feel like we could yarn and yarn, but panel Maggie, Leon, Anna and Michael. And we want to thank the Institute for Marine and Antarctic Studies for hosting us tonight in this spectacular location. Julia Baird will be back with you on Monday. Have an excellent evening from me and the team here. Good night.